Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Unraveling Politics, a weekly political analysis show. Hope you all had a great weekend. We don't have that many topics to cover this week, not because there aren't important things going on in the world, but because a lot of things are kind of in a bit of a holding pattern. The war with Iran, the SAVE Act, the government shutdown, nothing has changed on the midterm front, so it's going to be a bit of a lighter episode. So we'll get right into it. And the most important news of the week is, in the last few weeks, in the last month really, has been the war with Iran. So I'll be providing some new thoughts. If you're a regular listener, and if you'll know that I don't give the blow by blow, but I prefer to take a bird's eye view about what's going on. This week we're going to focus on why the war really can't end anytime soon, from both Iran and the president's perspective. So let's start with Iran's perspective, and I think we often forget about this. Before I go on, this is not me sympathizing with the regime, and I'm not saying that our strikes were wrong either, or that Iran is right in its thinking, just to be clear about that. So Iran has been negotiating with the United States really for the last 15 years, since the Obama administration in the early 2010s. Presidents come and go, but the regime has remained in power. So whenever there's a president that wants to renegotiate, that's how they are thinking. In 2015, the US and a few allies agreed to the Iran nuclear deal and basically capped the number of weapons that Iran could make. The stockpile of enriched uranium, which can be used for nuclear weapons, etc., etc. Whether or not this was a good deal, we're not going to discuss here today. I definitely don't know enough about it to may have an opinion on it. However, it was always a short-term deal for the most part. Some parts were were supposed to be indefinite, like for example the independent monitoring of Iran's nuclear capabilities that was supposed to last forever, but most clauses were supposed to sunset, and they would have expired eventually. This is where Trump comes in. Trump bombed Iran twice during midway through negotiations. So the incentive for Iran to negotiate is almost completely gone. I'm not saying it's a viable military strategy. I'm not one of those people. Think of it like this. If you are negotiating a raise or a job offer with your boss and your boss cuts your hours or threatens your job, then turns around and says, let's make a deal, I don't know about you, but I would probably quit or at least become very defensive. Once again, this is my opinion, is Iran sees this about survival. If they concede a peace now, what's to stop Trump or a future president from coming back at another point in, say, 6, 12, or 18 months demanding more? Nothing, of course. So let's flip to Trump. If you've been seething at me for the last 2 minutes, you're probably going to be a bit relieved here. We know Trump tries a maximalist strategy. He did that with the tariffs last year, and still, and on and on. And Trump can't just quit now. So all the anti-war people out there, good luck. Quitting right now would look horrendous. And not just for Trump, but for all of us. Why? Because Iran has blocked the Strait of Hormuz. And let's say in the future Iran is threatening either Israel or us or one of our allies, and then we try to fight back. They know all that they have to do is block the Strait of Hormuz again, which will cause another energy crisis that we are in right now. That is not acceptable either, of course. So I am anti-war, as I said last episode, but now that we are in, we need to keep going until they surrender, because the long-term cost of giving in is way too high. That's my sky-high view. And I'm recording this episode late on Sunday, believe it or not, I almost forgot to record it. We did get more word. President Trump has threatened to bomb Iranian power plants, and Iran has threatened to use its military to close the Strait of Hormuz indefinitely, which will send oil prices higher than what it is now at $106 a barrel as of this recording. And then Gas Buddies Patrick DeHaan believes we will be at $4 a gallon nationally for a gallon of gasoline. I believe we've already hit $5 for diesel. When was the last time we were at $4 a gallon? That was in August of 2022, and that was a horrid summer for many Americans. That was as inflation was reaching its peak. In the Trump administration, of course, they have no plans to pull back. You might read in the media, oh, they might be pulling back, they might not. It's very conflicting. And Scott Bessent says sometimes you have to escalate to de-escalate. Trump is threatening to bomb Iranian power plants if they don't leave the strait within 48 hours. It looks like that 48 hours is going to come and go as expected. And once again, it seems this war was a big mistake, and there was not much international backing at the moment, although NATO might come to help clear the strait. And that's where we are at right now. Remains to be seen. We should know more in the next week or two. So as with everything, whenever you do something, something needs to be paid for. And Republicans, they are in complete control of Congress. They are trying to find a way to pay for this war. Democrats are not going to help out for sure. Since this would use a process called reconciliation, it would be able to get through the Senate without a filibuster being able to block it. The cost floating around is about $200 billion. And let me remind everyone that that could fund the SNAP program for 2 years, and it could have extended Affordable Care Act subsidies for like 20 years. That's how long. The Washington Post originally reported that it was going to be $200 billion. Pete Hegseth didn't deny that it would be $200 billion. And there's been no other number that the administration has floated, so it looks like it will in fact be $200 billion. Trump says it's a small price to pay to make sure we stay tippity top. And let me remind everybody that $200 billion from our country would be essentially $600 per person. So we could give every American $600, or we could spend $200 billion on the military. And still a ways to go before we know what's going to happen. It might not have enough support to pass through the House of Representatives. And it looks like there will be at least one Republican that opposes it. And then back here at home, speaking of Capitol Hill, I'm going to take you to Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., where they're trying to pass the Save America Act. Republicans have been increasingly belligerent in trying to pass the act. Once again, I think Democrats should try to stick some amendments in here, and I think they will likely get support if Democrats vote for it. Moderates like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, she might go for it. You might even get a little bit of support from some other senators. Amendments could be anything from delaying implementation until after the midterm elections, changing what kind of IDs are accepted, whether it has to be shown in person or by mail, etc., etc. And I think the best way to get around this whole issue for everybody, is to establish a national photo ID. It could be run by the Department of Homeland Security. They already do it through all of our workplaces. When you start a new job, you have to show your I-9 documents, your passport, your birth certificate, your social security card, your driver's license, whatever. There's some other things as well. It could be run through Homeland Security. They already do quite a bit. And it could be a simple ID with a name, a photo, a date of birth, and a signature, and maybe an address. That probably wouldn't even be necessary. Maybe a location of birth, that could be put on there. It's really not a big deal. And this would likely take years to implement if this is what they did. It took 20 years to get the Real ID in place. It was signed in 2005. It was supposed to go into effect in 2020, then it was delayed to 2023, then it was delayed to 2025, and it finally went into effect. And even then, there are still so many exceptions. We could make these new IDs, they could last 10 or even 20 years, like a passport, and I don't see the issue with this. There's might be some civil liberties concerns because the government would have a national database of all of us, but they already do with our social security numbers, so it really shouldn't be a big deal. And it would remove the Democrats' excuses, and it would remove the Republican excuses. But of course, they're not going to go with that. Anyway, we might be asking, all right, well, what are Republicans going to do about this? Well, 24 House conservatives are threatening to essentially filibuster all legislation until the Save America Act is passed. This quote-unquote filibuster is not a real filibuster. They just plan to vote against all legislation. The reason the SAVE Act is important is not just because of the implications to voting, which is also probably the biggest thing, of course, and that affects everybody, all 330 million Americans at some point. It will likely affect the Texas Senate race. So President Trump has not endorsed in the Texas Senate primary. I talked about this, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and we still have not heard anything. I predicted that Trump would endorse the challenger to the sitting senator. We have not gotten an endorsement. I'm starting to think we will never get an endorsement. We'll have to wait and see. Even if Trump does somehow sign the Save America Act, if Democrats fold like a manila envelope in the wind, then this will face legal issues. There's going to be lawsuits. It's going to get tied up in the courts for weeks or maybe even months. The problem with Republicans' resistance efforts in the House is that they have very little authority to do anything. They can only threaten to hold up bills, which has nothing to do with the Senate Majority Leader. There's no legislation passing through Congress. The Senate Majority Leader, his position has nothing to do with what House Republicans are doing. The only thing that people that could remove Thune from the Senate is Senate Republicans, and they seem to be sticking by him. He's only a new leader. He hasn't even been in the job more than 18 months. Nobody has called for him to step down. The media's not reporting it. The media's not speculating about it, so nothing. And so I'm thinking the Save America Act is going to stall out and it's going to die at the end of the Congress, and then we're not going to hear about it ever again. And as I said last episode, I'm starting to believe this will be a brutal end to the 119th Congress, a slow and painful death. As for the Texas Senate race, it looks like the primary will definitely head to runoff. The deadline for one of the candidates to withdraw has passed, so there's going to be another 2 months of infighting. And then lastly, we don't have many topics to talk about. I didn't want to end it here, but there is some speculation, and maybe this could be interesting to some of you, and I definitely want to hear your opinions on this, is a Supreme Court vacancy opening up. And we've not heard about a Supreme Court vacancy opening up in about 4 years since Joe Biden was president. And I briefly mentioned it last episode, and I was talking about Senate business, so we have a little bit of time to extend it here. It is rumored that Justice Samuel Alito, he's going to retire from the bench. It is only a rumor, it is not confirmed. There is some evidence for it. There's 3 pieces. The first piece is this is his 20th year on the bench. He was sworn in 2006 during the Bush administration, so this would be a nice year to round it off. And if that was it, if it was just 20 years, I would dismiss the speculation because the media, they like to get clicks. Unlike me, they want people to click on their articles and watch their videos. However, he is releasing a new book in October. That is when the Supreme Court's term begins. If he was promoting his book by doing speeches and tours around the country at the top universities like Harvard and Yale and Princeton, he wouldn't have time to be hearing cases. This guy also, lastly, he's going to turn 76 this year. And he is at retirement age. He's not super old like Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think she's like 86 or something. But he's getting up there. And what we do know 100% for sure is he does not have another 30 years on the bench. And lastly, I know I said lastly already, but lastly, and I think this is the most important factor, and this is probably the one that you were thinking about when I brought this up, it is not a foregone conclusion that Republicans will hold on to the Senate. And I think that is the biggest piece of evidence for it. If Alito retires in January 2027, Democrats have taken control of the Senate, then they're going to do what McConnell did to Barack Obama, and they're going to block the appointment until the next president is elected. So I'm thinking Alito will retire before the midterms elections, a new justice will be installed, and then Trump will get a 4th appointment, and the court will stay at a 6-3 conservative majority. It's not actually going to change the balance of power. It's still, Alito is a conservative justice. You would be replacing a conservative with another conservative. But the point is, if Alito retires now and gets replaced by somebody in their 40s or 50s, they could be on the bench for 20 or 30 years. Then if they die, if Gavin Newsom is president, then it's going to become a 5-4 majority. So think about it this way: if Democrats take control of the Senate, and then Newsom or hopefully Hillary Clinton, that's who I'm hoping for, becomes president in 2028, that's 6 years of minimum from the next Republican president, maybe 10 years if it's a 2-term appointment. And then Alito, in 10 years, he will be almost 85 years old, and he would really be risking it. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, as I said, she was like 87 or 86 when she died, and she really should have retired under Obama, and that decision ultimately led to the fall of the Roe v. Wade decision less than 2 years later. So really, the person to blame for the Dobbs decision is Ruth Bader Ginsburg. That's the great irony here. And Republicans don't want it to be in the opposite situation just a couple of years. So that's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking Alito will retire. I don't think Clarence Thomas is going to retire. He's owned by more people than his ancestors were as slaves. So he's not going anywhere. And then Justice Roberts, he's the Chief Justice. He said he's going to die in office, so I don't think he's going to go anywhere either. He's also not a big fan of Trump, clearly, so I don't think he's going to let Trump pick a replacement. I think he'd rather let a Democrat pick his replacement. So they're not going anywhere, and obviously none of the liberal justices are going to retire while Trump is president. They all hate him. They probably want him hanged in front of the court building. So the only one that really realistically could retire is Alito, unless Sonia Sotomayor gets a heart attack and dies. And who knows, because she's not in great health. So she could, but I think it's going to be Alito. And if Alito does not retire, if Republicans keep the control of the Senate in 2026, then Alito is definitely going to retire before 2029, because at that point he would be getting very, very old. There are signs he's going to retire. There aren't many of them, but those are the ones I explained. Alito seems to be the most likely, as I've explained why. In my opinion, I think he will be announcing he will step down probably in May or June, and he could remain on the bench until a successor is chosen, but I think he would be gone by the beginning of October. So that is all for now. Thank you for tuning in, as always, and I will see you next week. So please, as always, please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have a great one. Bye-bye.